Chapter 1. The sealed letter that screamed. It was the sort of drawer people forget exists. Built flush into the woodwork, hidden behind shelves bloated with aging books and journals no one had touched in years, except for her. Eliza Trent had arrived at Greystone Hall just after dawn, the kind of dawn that felt reluctant to show itself. The storm had only broken an hour prior, and the gravel road that led to the estate was soaked, turning under her tyres like the place itself had no desire for visitors. And perhaps that was true. The manor had belonged to Professor Algernon Worthing, a man whose name stirred little recognition outside cryptography circles, but who'd once whispered things into the ears of people in very high places, governments, archives, secret boards whose meetings never made minutes. He had died with no heirs, no will, and no explanation. Only the remnants of what he called his personal correspondences left behind in folders marked only with numbers and initials. But in that concealed drawer, one no archivist had catalogued, no solicitor had known existed, there was something more. A single envelope, off-white, crusted in places, no wax seal, no stamp, just a faint spray of dark, reddish-brown speckles, as if whoever held it last hadn't meant to. And inside, folded crisply, perfectly, were 4 words, written in neat, forceful ink. I never forgave you. Eliza stood still for far too long. She wasn't alone in the room, not technically. The team she'd brought from the British Library was moving bookshelves, photographing artifacts, discussing metadata in muffled tones. But their words were distant, insignificant, because something about that envelope felt heavier than it should have. As though it had waited not simply to be found, but to be understood. She turned it over again, fingers brushing its edges. No address, no initials. But when she held it to the light, something caught her eye, a faint impression. Letters, just barely visible beneath the ink. Pressed hard enough into the paper to leave a ghost. And there, barely visible, Case X. She knew what that meant. She shouldn't have, but she did. There were 9 documented files in the Worthing archives. 9 cipher cases, each unsolved, each connected by fragments of encoded notes, strange deaths or disappearances, framed as accidents. The press had dismissed them, police had shelved them, but Professor Worthing hadn't, and now, it seemed, neither could she. This was the 10th. The envelope became her obsession, its folds, its creases, the pressure of the pen. She scanned it under infrared, ultraviolet, under candlelight just as Worthing was known to do, and finally, faintly, another layer emerged. Beneath the phrase, almost like a shadow written by a different hand. It said only this: the key is under the ink. Eliza didn't sleep for 43 hours. In that time, she reconstructed every case Worthing had logged. The sealed confessional at Inverness, the drowned violinist in Dover, with sheet music encoded into her diary, the family portrait that revealed a missing child only when viewed through red acetate. But none of them had this message. None carried this tone. This felt personal. Still, the connection was clear. The envelope was part of something larger, a pattern she had yet to see. And that night, as the wind slammed against Greystone's upper windows and the lights flickered, she found the second piece. Not in a drawer, not under a floorboard, but behind a loose panel in the library's hearth, unlisted on any blueprint, hidden not by design, but by intuition. A leather-bound folio, dry, cracked, its cover etched only with a single number, 10. Inside she found a map, no locations, just lines, circles, intersections. But what caught her breath wasn't the geometry, it was the writing in the bottom corner, barely legible beneath layers of smudged graphite. Forgiveness was never the point. Across the room, a clock struck midnight. Eliza sat there, the folio opens in her lap, listening to the mechanism's echo reverberate across the empty chambers of Greystone Hall. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was watching. She cross-referenced the symbols with every cipher system she knew. Enigma, Virginie. Her mind chased combinations into the early hours, and when the storm finally ceased, when the sun tried again to lift itself above the trees, she noticed something new. The map wasn't static. No, it hadn't changed. But what she thought were intersections weren't. They were letters. Small, carved into the lines at impossible angles, almost as though the shapes had been designed to obscure language in plain sight. And when she plotted the angles, when she drew red over black and let the map fall against the candle-lit wall, she saw it. A message, hidden in geometry. Not all codes are meant to be broken. She paced the corridor outside the library for over an hour. Every time her shoes tapped the tile, the sound shifted subtly, like someone was just around the corner, listening, mimicking. She stopped, turned. Nothing. But on the 12th turn, she noticed it. A shift in shadow. A reflection that didn't match her own. It vanished the moment she looked directly, but in the mirror, she saw a hand. Just for a second. Holding the envelope. The others said she was overworked. The kind of hallucinations brought on by too little sleep, too much candlelight, and minds tangled in the mathematics of ghosts. She didn't argue. She simply kept going. In the days that followed, Eliza uncovered 8 more pieces, each hidden, each paired with an unsolved element from Worthing's 9 documented files, but none led to a name. Not yet. Only suggestions. Photographs with faces scratched out, diaries with every eye removed, tape reels that played backward messages recorded in rooms that no longer existed. Each one more precise, more disturbing. And in the centre of it all, Case X, the envelope. Always the envelope. She began reading Agatha Christie's lesser-known novels again. Not for pleasure, for patterns. She found them too. Phrases buried in narrative, sentences with one too many commas, entire chapters whose opening lines spelled messages when stacked. What if Christie hadn't been inspired by crime? What if she had been warning us? By the end of the week, Eliza wasn't sleeping at all. Her notes had grown frantic, pins on the map. Scraps of code cross-stitched with passages from Nemesis. Blood-type references in Crooked House. A Morse-coded poem that matched the rhythm of footsteps she kept hearing at 3:03 AM every night. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. That night, the power went out. She lit the library with nothing but 6 wax candles, placed exactly where Worthing had positioned them in a photo from 1934. The flames danced strangely, as though reacting to something unspoken. Then, quietly, a drawer creaked open. One no one had touched. Inside, not paper, not ink, but a chess piece. A bishop carved from bone, wrapped around its neck. A note. It read simply, "Your move." She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood there, frozen, breathing slowly. The piece was from the same set found with Case 7, a set that had been destroyed in a fire, confirmed by 3 separate investigators. It shouldn't exist, but it did. In her hand, the note was signed, not with a name, but with a drawing. 3 concentric circles, one broken. She'd seen that symbol once before, at the top of the folio, and once more, hidden in the corner of the envelope. She had missed it. Now she understood. Whoever had orchestrated these cases, whoever had hidden these files, hadn't just wanted to preserve them. They wanted her to find them. They had been waiting, and now the game had begun. If this mystery chilled you to the core, subscribe for the next case Miss Marple was never meant to solve. Chapter 2. The Background. The files. No one was meant to open. She returned to the study just after 4 in the morning, not because she'd slept, she hadn't, but because the night had changed something. The discovery of the chess piece, the way the candlelight shifted when it should have stood still, and the envelope, always the envelope, had carved a hole in her sense of reason. There was something she'd missed, some pattern still hiding behind the surface of logic. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but it was there. pressing quietly, waiting to be recognized. Greystone Hall didn't wake with the day. It merely adjusted. The fog outside thickened slightly. The damp in the walls whispered down the corridors. Somewhere, a grandfather clock reset itself with a weary chime, as if even time had begun to lose faith in its purpose. And Eliza Trent, standing at the threshold of the manor's east wing, tightened her grip on the leather-bound folio marked Case 10 and stepped forward into the unknown. This was where it had all begun. Not just the files. The legend, the theory, the quiet obsession that some had mocked and others had quietly feared. That Agatha Christie's most puzzling mysteries were not entirely fictional. Eliza had once dismissed it herself, before she'd seen the original manuscript of The Pale Horse, annotated with names never printed in any edition. Before she decoded the musical cipher hidden in the margins of Five Little Pigs, before the Worthing files had landed in her hands, unrequested, unsigned, unexplainable. Now she believed. She didn't want to, but belief has never required consent. The East Wing had been locked for years. The corridor smelled of velvet decay and unspoken things. Plaster was cracking where portraits once hung. But as Eliza stepped through, she saw them. Faint outlines erased by time. 10 wooden panels built into the wall, each one marked not with a name, but with a number. Roman numerals, I through X, and a 10th, deeper set, still sealed. Case X. It was all true. Professor Worthing had compiled the files himself, each one obsessively detailed, each a fragment of an investigation that never reached resolution. The authorities had moved on. The families had accepted silence, but Worthing hadn't. He had seen the connections no one else wanted to believe in. Connections between crimes across decades, cities, even countries. Connections linked not by motive or evidence, but by code. He believed someone, or something, was orchestrating them. At first glance, the files seemed unrelated. A piano tuner found vanished during a flood, his tuning fork lodged in the frame of a mirror 3 towns away. A governess who left behind a trail of embroidered pillowcases, each one bearing a single, seemingly random letter. A private detective whose final case ended with a photograph of himself nailed to his own front door, smiling. But the codes were there, always buried, always subtle. And then there was Christie. She had long claimed her ideas came from dreams, flashes of inspiration, whispers from her imagination. But in her private notebooks, pages never published, never even discussed, were references that made Eliza's blood slow. The man from the archway, never speak of him aloud. She did not fall. He changed the height of the stair. Message scratched behind the 3rd brick. Don't decode it unless you're certain you want to see. They weren't notes for fiction. They were observations, and they matched details in the Worthing files with unsettling accuracy. Greystone Hall had once belonged to Worthing's cousin, a man named Elias Murrow. A recluse, fond of puzzles, who kept company only with his birds and his records and his locked rooms. When Worthing died, the estate passed quietly to no one. And when Eliza was given the temporary rights to examine the files, no one stopped her. No one even asked why. As she stood in front of the wall of panels now, she could almost feel the codes watching her. Not the eyes of a person, not a ghost, but something built of decisions made long ago, the kind of watching that happens when you're exactly where someone wanted you to be, long after they've disappeared. She approached panel I and opened it. Inside, a black folder, neatly typed pages annotated in the margin with faded red ink, a paperclip rusted into place. At the top, in Worthing's steady hand, Case I, the Vicar's Pendulum. A small town. A vicar found unconscious in his own chapel, surrounded by swinging incense burners arranged like a Newton's cradle, 1 burner missing. A verse from Psalms written in ash across the altar. No blood, no weapon, no memory. But the altar cloth, when folded, spelled a name. One that no one in the town recognized, except for the librarian, who disappeared the next day. Case 2 involved a chess club where no one remembered the final match. The scoreboard erased itself every morning. Case 3, a girl who spoke in rhymes before vanishing on her birthday. Each rhyme was an anagram, leading to a message only Worthing had decoded. She left by the frame. It went on. 10 cases, all unsolved, all threaded by messages invisible to the casual observer, and somehow each one contained an echo of Christie's work, whether through theme, structure, or the most unsettling detail, mirrored dialogue. One line in particular appeared in 3 different cases. He wore no coat, but left no shadow. Christie had used it only once, in an unpublished draft of a short story never released, The Grey Room Key. That draft had been missing from her archives since 1951. Eliza sat on the floor now, cross-legged, folios open around her like petals. Her notes sprawled beside her, fingers blackened by carbon paper and candle soot. And as she reviewed the files, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Each case included a page at the back, blank, except for a single number in the bottom corner, coordinates. They were close, within a 20-mile radius of Greystone Hall, some even closer. She marked them on a map. They formed a circle, not perfect, but intentional. And at the centre of that circle was Greystone's south garden, the one Worthing never wrote about, the one everyone claimed had been sealed off after the war due to foundation instability. But Eliza had been there. Yesterday she'd wandered through it, nothing but overgrown hedges and crumbling statues. At least, that's what she thought, until she remembered the sundial. It was broken. Its shadow never moved. And beneath it was a plaque, scratched nearly to illegibility, but now, in the light of what she'd read, the inscription echoed through her mind like an unfinished sentence. Time cannot be trusted when the code is the keeper. The coordinates, the files, the envelope, the chess piece, the envelope's phrase. I never forgave you. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even anger. It was instruction. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. She returned to the corridor of panels, opened each one in turn. All 10 files were now in her possession, but there was something else. Panel X, still sealed. She touched the wood. It was colder than the others, and when she pressed her ear to it, she heard nothing, no movement, no echo, just silence, except... No, not silence, a click. Something unlocked itself, and the panel swung open. Inside, not a file, not papers, a mirror. Framed in black, clouded with age, and in its centre, etched into the glass, were the same 4 words from the envelope. I never forgave you. But now they were reversed, not mirrored, not flipped, rewritten. You never forgave me. She reached out to touch the glass, and just for a second, her reflection didn't match her hand. It moved just a moment too slow, then it smiled. And the light flickered. The silence wasn't empty. It was watching. Chapter 3. First case. The ink that didn't fade. It began, as most impossibilities do, in a place that felt too quiet. Eliza Trent stood beneath the hanging chandelier of Greystone Hall's library, its light catching the dust like stilled rain, each particle suspended mid-fall. The dawn outside hadn't yet committed to daylight, and inside, the world remained at half-tone. Still, watchful, breath held. The library had been untouched for decades. Not preserved, not abandoned, just paused. As though someone had once walked out mid-sentence and never returned to finish the paragraph. She had awoken that morning with a name on her lips. Julian Hartmore, a vicar once, blind from birth. Found hanging in his private library in 1952. The official report, suicide. The file Worthing had labelled Case I, but it was the note, folded on his writing desk, unsigned, unaddressed, and written in what was first believed to be blank paper that had perplexed even the most stubborn minds. Worthing had suspected it wasn't blank. Eliza now suspected he was right. She lit 6 candles, one by one, placing them where she remembered seeing soot marks etched into the desk's varnish. The wax flickered across the room, brushing old tomes with yellow light, pooling into corners where secrets hadn't yet dried. Then she opened the folder. Case I, the library hanging. Inside. Photographs of the room, meticulous diagrams, excerpts from Hartmore's sermons, typewritten police summaries, and at the very top, a sheet of thick ivory paper. It looked ordinary, a slight crease at one corner, the scent of old paper and cedar oil clinging to it. But Worthing had believed this page held a message. Eliza did too. She held it above the candlelight. And that's when the ink appeared. At first, only a word, faint, elusive. But as the heat coaxed it from hiding, more followed. Not in lines, but circles, swirls, a script not quite of this age. Symbols bordering on the familiar, yet bending rules in strange directions. But one phrase stood alone, set apart at the top. The door is not a door when it leads nowhere. Her breath caught. The ink hadn't faded over time. It had never revealed itself until now. And yet, this was written by a blind man. How does a man who has never seen light compose a message that only candlelight can reveal? She leaned closer, traced the loops and lines with her eyes. Below the phrase, in barely legible script, a sequence of numbers. Not coordinates this time, not dates. Just a sequence, 9, 4, 7, 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 8. She recognized the pattern, not as math, as movement, footsteps, a dance, a route through the room. She glanced up. The bookshelves towered in silence, but now they no longer looked passive. The numbered pattern mapped perfectly onto the columns of books. Row 9 first, then 4, then 7, each corresponding to a shelf. Each shelf lined with identical volumes on the meaning of silence. Authored by Julian Hartmore himself. She pulled the 9th, the 4th, the 7th, each one heavier than expected, each one hollow. Inside the 7th, tucked behind false pages, was a scrap of leather, embossed, a chess square, B2. She returned to the desk, opened Worthing's notes. In the margins of his notes on Hartmore's death, a peculiar scribble. The game never started on B2. That's the point. Eliza glanced down at the piece in her hand. Not a square. A lid, designed to cover something. She turned it over. There, pressed into the underside of the leather, another set of letters. Anagrammed, twisted. Requiem before coda. She paused. Requiem before coda. Music. A final prayer before the ending. Something meant to precede resolution. The library had no instruments, but the far wall had once housed a phonograph. She'd seen it, covered in dust, its horn like a fossilized bloom. She crossed the room, brushing cobwebs from the velvet cover. Lifted the lid. Inside, beneath the turntable, another note, folded sharply, sealed with wax this time, black wax. The impression, a single question mark. She broke it open. Inside, a single word. Reconsidered. She stared at the page. The word vibrated with something more than intention. It felt planted. But not by Hartmore. Not by Worthing. Someone had returned here, recently. She looked again at the bookshelves, at the pattern. Her eyes moved faster now. 9, 4, 7, 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 8. A spiral, but not of books, of time. Each shelf marked a year from 1944 to 1952. The years leading up to Hartmore's final breath. And within each volume, more than pages, more than text, clues. Not all had been found yet. She began opening them. In volume 1947, a pressed flower, wilted beyond recognition, folded with a church program marked postponed. In 1949, a page torn from a journal, the ink blotted, but beneath it, a name scratched in desperation. Avery. In 1951, a photograph, blurred and discoloured, a mirror reflecting no one, but on the back, a phrase. Wherever I go, I leave myself behind. The silence wasn't empty. It was watching. She turned to the photograph again. The mirror. It was identical to the one she'd seen in panel X, the one that had reflected her hand, too slowly. She rose to her feet, heart steady but strained. Everything was aligning, not toward an answer, but towards something larger, a pattern not yet complete, a story being told through fragments, messages waiting in rooms, written in ash, pressed into wax, scattered across time. And then she noticed something else. The suicide note's final lines, visible now, fully in candlelight, formed a perfect circle. The text curved inward, enclosing one final phrase at the centre, barely bigger than the head of a pin. She squinted, tilted the page. There. The answer lies beneath the music. She froze. The phonograph. But not the needle. The record itself. She rushed back, heart a quiet metronome, reached beneath the velvet and removed the one record resting there. It had no label, just a carved spiral, hand-done, etched into the wax itself. And along its edge, visible only when tilted, were tiny notches. Not scratches, not damage, Morse. She played the record. It spun silently, no music, no voice, just faint clicks. She recorded them, ran the pattern through the codebreaker Worthing had once designed for her. The translation was swift. You will not find him. You will become him. Her fingers clenched around the edge of the player. Not Hartmore. Not Worthing. Her. Someone was writing the code forward. She stared again at the suicide note. The candle flickered harder now, the shadows seeming to lean forward. Hartmore, blind from birth, had written a coded message in light-reactive ink. He had mapped a cipher through shelf order. He had concealed clues across years, across books, across rooms. But he could not have seen what he wrote, and yet he did. She remembered Worthing's marginalia, his final words on Case I. If he couldn't see, someone else must have dictated it. But if that's true, the real author has yet to show their face. She turned to the mirror on the far wall, the one she'd avoided all morning, the one from the photograph. It stood taller now somehow, darker in its reflection. She moved toward it, 1 step, 2. At the 3rd step, the reflection flickered. Her candle dimmed, and for the briefest moment, her face disappeared, replaced by someone else. Same eyes, same jaw, but smiling differently. She blinked. The image vanished. The candle steadied. She stepped back. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was only beginning. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 4. 2 ND Case. Voices in the wax cylinder. The air in Greystone's west parlour felt colder than the rest of the house. Not the kind of cold brought by stone or draught, but a thinner stillness, as though the space itself were exhaling softly, deliberately, waiting for her to speak first. Eliza didn't. She stood just past the threshold, where dust had collected in faint crescent patterns around the legs of furniture that hadn't been moved in decades. A chaise lounge under the bay window sagged slightly, its fabric worn thin in places by fingers long gone. Against the far wall, a low wooden cabinet carved with looping arabesques and curling vines waited in silence. But her attention wasn't on the room's furniture. It was on the sound, a hum, barely audible, almost dismissible, but consistent, not mechanical, not organic, musical. She followed it to the cabinet and eased it open. Inside, nestled in velvet, rested a music box, not ornate, not expensive. A child's toy, worn brass, the ballerina atop it frozen mid-turn, arms in an unnatural pose that suggested movement unfinished. Eliza reached for it, hesitated, then turned the key gently. The tune began slowly, not at first melodic. Notes staggered as though unsure of their own rhythm, a fractured lullaby. The ballerina spun, or tried to. She shuddered, paused, then twisted once, slowly, like a reluctant clock hand marking a forbidden hour. But Eliza's eyes weren't on the dancer. They were on the bottom of the box, where something shimmered beneath the winding mechanism. She stopped the music, flipped the box, and pried loose a circular panel, worn but carefully sealed. Behind it, a wax cylinder. Small, dark, with faint grooves that shimmered under the candlelight. She removed it and placed it on the phonograph from the adjacent study, the same one that had played static the night she found the envelope's message, only this time the record wasn't blank. The sound emerged slowly, grainy, uneven. Then a voice, rough, male, measured, whispering at first, then louder. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." A pause, the crackle of dust and old technology. She wasn't supposed to be there. The note was meant for only one. Eliza froze. She recognized the voice. It was Giles Tennyson. Executed in 1938 for the murder of his wife and her sister, twin sisters, poisoned on the same night, each found with a nearly identical note placed beside them. "The truth tastes bitter." Tennyson had maintained his innocence until the very end. No confession, no explanation. Only that phrase, repeated over and over in court. The music box lied. Eliza had seen the case referenced in Worthing's archive as Case 2. The details were bizarre enough to warrant attention. 2 deaths within an hour, the same symptoms, the same final message. Tennyson had opportunity, motive and history, but this voice recording wasn't supposed to exist. He had been executed 2 days before the earliest date this wax cylinder had been marked into the archive, and yet, here it was. She played it again. "I thought the code would hide her, not reveal her," another crackle. "You told me it would protect them. You said it wasn't real, that the code doesn't unlock truth. But you lied." Then the voice broke, fragmented under its own weight. Eliza leaned forward. There, beneath the words, under the surface, another tone. Barely audible, too low to register properly. She recorded the audio, slowed it, filtered it. It wasn't music, it was language. A frequency-masked message hidden beneath the confession. Once decoded, it read, "She still moves, she still sees. Stop the clock, or she will remember." Eliza didn't breathe. The phrase made no sense on its own, but then she remembered the ballerina, that impossible pose, that movement which didn't seem to match the tune. She returned to the music box, wound it again, let it play. As the melody tinkled through the dusty air, the ballerina moved once more, jerky, deliberate, and then stopped. Right arm raised, left hand pointing to the bass. Eliza lifted the ballerina gently. Beneath her feet, another disc. Not wax this time, glass. She removed it carefully and held it to the candlelight. Within it, etched in reverse script, were numbers, dozens, spaced unevenly. She copied them down. They weren't coordinates, not ciphertext, but the pattern, a date and a time. June 14, 1938, 10:03 p.m. The moment both sisters had died, except one had died minutes later. That discrepancy had always been a footnote in the police report. Heart failure delays, overlapping toxic responses, but the timecode suggested otherwise. She ran the timestamp against the frequency on the wax cylinder. It matched. The voice had not been recorded before Giles Tennyson's execution. It had been recorded after. Eliza stared at the spinning cylinder, the quiet clicks filling the room once more. "You said it wasn't real." The words haunted her. Someone had told him about the code. Someone had given him the music box. Someone who wanted him to believe the cipher would conceal something, or someone. But who? She opened Casey's folder again, flipping through the brittle pages. One photograph had always puzzled Worthing, the one taken moments before the police arrived. In the corner of the image, on the far wall behind the bodies, a mirror, and in the mirror, a figure. Not Giles, not a woman, but a third shape, unidentifiable, and smiling. Worthing had written one note beneath it. Reflection does not always reflect. Eliza returned to the parlour, lifted the glass disc again. Now she noticed it, sketched not only with numbers but tiny carvings around the edge. Notches. 14 of them. She placed the disc against the phonograph as though it were a record. It didn't fit perfectly, but when she turned the needle, manually, gently, it caught. A single note echoed from the speaker. A hum, consistent, unchanging, but layered. She ran it through the spectral analyzer. 3 voices, one Giles, one unknown, and the third? A match. To Julian Hartmore, the blind vicar from Case I. Impossible, but there it was. A dead vicar, a condemned man, speaking in chorus through a music box no one had opened in over half a century. She stood, heart steady now, not numb, but resolved. Whoever had made these recordings, whoever had threaded these messages into artifacts, whoever had crafted these deaths to resemble puzzles, they weren't just leaving breadcrumbs. They were writing a score, and Greystone Hall was the orchestra. She turned to the cabinet again, opened its lower drawer. Inside, velvet-lined compartments, empty but numbered. 10 of them. 9 were empty. 1 held the ballerina's bass. 9 clues to find. 9 voices yet unheard. 1 final movement remaining. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 5. 3RD Case. A secret is exposed. The numbered portraits. Eliza hadn't planned on visiting the West Wing again so soon. Not after the voice in the wax. Not after the ballerina turned without music. Not after she heard Julian Hartmore's voice echoing from the grave. But something in the air of Greystone Hall that morning drew her back. Not the storm, though the thunder outside did mutter like a restless audience awaiting a forgotten performance. It wasn't curiosity either. By now that had hollowed itself out into something else. Something more obedient. Something closer to inevitability. The portraits had been mentioned once, in Worthing's footnotes, scrawled between pages of Case 3 with a single warning: do not trust the order they're hung in. The gallery stood silent now. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and cedar, and a single shaft of light from the high arched window illuminated the dust in delicate constellations. The portraits lined the room on 3 walls, 13 in total. All oil-painted, all faces, men, women, 1 child, all seated. Each figure stared just off-centre, as though something in the room had their attention, but whatever it was, Eliza couldn't see it. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Each frame was carved in gold, elegant but aged. Beneath each, a nameplate had been removed. Instead, small Roman numerals had been carved directly into the frames, some high, some low, a few oddly off-centre. She circled slowly, 1, 2, 3, but when she reached X, she paused. The next frame, marked X, was blank. No painting, just the wall, a faint outline slightly paler than the rest, the dust undisturbed. It hadn't been taken in haste. It had been replaced. Directly beside it, where the next portrait should have hung, was a new canvas, unnumbered. The brushwork less refined, still wet in places, the oil paint not yet dry. And the image? A room. One she recognized instantly. Greystone's library. The chandelier, the desk, the candle holders. But something about the angle felt off. Like the room had been painted from a perspective no one was supposed to have. A high corner, almost from the ceiling, in the centre of the room, a figure seated at the desk, head bowed, hand extended toward an envelope. On the envelope, faint but unmistakable, 4 words: I never forgave you. She stepped back, her own breath caught in her throat. This painting, newly hung, unsigned, was not a memory. It was a record. Of her, in the room. 2 nights ago, the same envelope, the same hand, someone had painted her moment of discovery before she'd even known she was part of it. She turned toward the rest of the portraits, looked again, slower this time. Each canvas had a background, not just a chair and a figure, but something behind them, windows, hallways, bookshelves, and each background changed, subtly. In Portrait 2, the curtains were torn. In Portrait 4, the mirror held a second figure, faint, faceless. In Portrait 7, the clock read 3:03. Eliza moved closer. There, on the table behind the subject in Portrait 8, letters, tiny, etched into the grain of the wood, painted with deliberate effort to be overlooked. She adjusted her candle. The wax caught the strokes at just the right angle, and the words emerged. She dies at dawn. The letters repeated, once on each canvas, always the same phrase. She counted. 10 portraits had this message, hidden in various places. Books, chairs, window panes. The new unnumbered one was the 11th, but that wasn't possible. Worthing's archive only listed 10. She pulled out the case folder. Case 3, the collector's house. The subject, Matthew Enfield, a reclusive art broker with a private gallery of unregistered portraits. Enfield was found in his garden, face down, hands folded neatly behind his back, a paintbrush broken in two beneath him. The cause of death was inconclusive. He had hosted a dinner the night before with 12 guests. Only 10 had been identified, the other 2 never confirmed. Their names absent, their signatures forged, their seats unassigned, and the morning after his passing, Enfield's portrait gallery included a new canvas, a painting of himself, seated, dead, in the garden. She looked back to the wall. Portrait X, the missing one. Could it have shown Enfield? Or her? She turned once more to the painting of the library, of herself. And there, now that her eyes were adjusted to the brushwork, she saw it, in the corner. A second figure, faint, shrouded in the darkness behind the bookshelves, almost invisible, but looking directly at her. She hadn't seen them in the room that night, but in this rendering, whoever had painted it had. She traced the figure's shadow with her finger, and, at its feet, another symbol. 3 concentric circles, one broken, the same mark that had been carved into the bishop's base, the same that appeared on the envelope in Case X. She checked the gallery wall again, Roman numerals I through X. The blank frame marked X. And then, her portrait. Unnumbered. What came after X? She counted again. The sequence wasn't 9 plus 1. It was 9 plus 1 plus her. She wasn't studying the cases anymore. She was one. The gallery had always been part of the design, not just to hide messages, but to document players, each painting a timestamp, a confession in oil and shadow. And in each background, a variation, a pattern, window, mirror, clock, books, chair, always 5. Eliza mapped them. Each object appeared only once, per portrait. But some shifted positions, mirrors swapped walls, windows lost curtains, bookshelves changed titles, and when arranged numerically, in the order of their Roman numerals, the shifting elements spelled a message. It begins again with you. She stepped back. The air around the gallery had grown colder, not from the weather, from recognition. This was not about decoding the past. It was about setting the stage for what came next, and she was already in the frame. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 6. 4 Case. The stranger appears. The man in the fog. The fog had returned. It came not with thunder or rainfall, but with silence, soft, creeping, deliberate. It had swallowed the gravel drive by dusk, pressed against the library windows by nightfall, and now rolled across Greystone Hall like a curtain drawn between acts. Eliza stood at the second-floor landing, eyes on the garden path below. There was no moon, no movement, only the fog shifting in waves, thick as wool, lit faintly by the candle behind her. But she could feel something in it, something watching. She stepped back, closed the curtain, and turned once more to the page before her. Case 4. One of the thinnest files in the Worthing archive, at least in pages, but what it lacked in length, it made up for in weight. Notes handwritten in erratic ink, newspaper clippings with red twine pinned through the corners, and at the very centre a sketch, unfinished, torn at the bottom. The caption read, "He was always there, in the fog." 5 murders, 5 locations, no connection by date, region, or method. And yet, each witness testimony included that same line, as though spoken from the same dream. In the case of Margaret Ellsworth, an opera singer found lifeless on the steps of her own stage. Her assistant testified under oath. "I saw someone just outside, standing in the mist, not moving, just watching. I thought it was the porter, but when I turned again, he was gone." In the Dorset Woods case, a child had been found huddled beneath a wagon, eyes wide, voice trembling. He never spoke, just stood there in the white stuff. He had a face like... I can't say, I don't remember. And in Worthing's own hand tucked behind a journal page in Case 2, a line scribbled in the margin. "He was always there, in the fog." The same phrase. Eliza compared the sketches, taken from each account, drawn by different hands. The figure was never clear. A long coat in some, a wide-brimmed hat in others, but always the same posture. Always at a distance, and always obscured by fog. She laid the drawings side by side. They were too consistent to be imagined, but too elusive to be real. She flipped the page. On the reverse of the Dorset Wood sketch, a time was written, 3:03 a.m. She felt her breath catch. It was the same time the footsteps had echoed in the hallway 3 nights ago, the same time she'd heard the whisper behind the library mirror, the same hour the candle flame had bent without air. She checked her watch. It was 3:02. The hallway outside the study creaked. Eliza rose from her chair. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Only listened. Another creak, then silence. She crossed to the door, opened it slowly. The corridor was empty. No wind, no sound. But the scent of smoke lingered faintly in the air, like something that had once burned long ago and never fully left the wood. She followed it, down the hall, past the broken grandfather clock, past the mirror. And there, at the far end of the corridor, a faint light, the music rooms. She entered cautiously. No fire in the grate, no light but the one candle on the harpsichord. But the seat was warm. Someone had been there. And on the sheet music, spread open without dust, a message, scrawled in reverse over the notes. "Look beneath the lowest key." She knelt, lifted the last ivory. It clicked beneath her finger. The panel beneath the harpsichord opened. Inside, an old wax cylinder. But this one was different, smaller, blacker, unlabelled. She returned to the phonograph, loaded the cylinder, turned the crank. The sound was faint at first, a static field of silence. Then, a voice. Not human, not mechanical, something in between. It whispered, not words but fragments. "She walks, behind, left undone, always watching." Then the recording reversed, played again, backward, the pitch dropped, and the voice became clearer. Eliza ran the reversal through Worthing's transcriber. The message emerged, line by line. "You looked where she looked, you heard what she heard, you see what she never said, you are where she was." Eliza stared at the machine. The audio looped once more. This time, she noticed something layered beneath it. A second frequency, barely audible, a tone, modulated. She enhanced the waveform, and there, buried in the pulse, another message, a location. Greystone Hall, East Garden Well. Her breath halted. She'd walked past it 3 times, overgrown, chained shut, forgotten, or so she had thought. She took the lantern and stepped outside. The fog clung to her like fabric. The gravel path crunched without echo, and the air, dense, unmoving, held a quiet like breath, waiting to be exhaled. The well stood under the old arbour, Vines knotted across its rim. The chain rusted into place, but as she approached, she saw the padlock had been snapped, not rusted through, cut cleanly. She peered into the well. Darkness. But as she lowered the lantern, the light caught something, a shape, wooden, angular, a box. She hoisted it out, unmarked but not sealed. Inside, photographs of her, standing in the library, sleeping in the parlour, sitting at the phonograph. Moments she had never seen. Moments no one should have captured. And in each photo, barely visible in the background, through windows, across reflections, behind furniture, a figure, standing in the fog, same silhouette, same posture, always watching. And on the final photo, tucked at the back, folded over, her. Tonight, holding the photograph box, she dropped it, stepped back, and from within the well echoed softly, impossibly, a voice. Not loud, not near, but clear. "You've seen me now." The fog thickened, her lantern dimmed, and behind her, somewhere in the quiet, a footstep. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. If you've followed the mystery this far, subscribe for what comes next, before the fog returns. Chapter 7. Fifth case. Something doesn't add up. The chessboard in the cellar. The key to the cellar had been missing since her first day at Greystone. Eliza had searched the obvious places, beneath stair treads, inside coat linings, behind portraits, every hiding spot Worthing was known to favour. She'd traced the blueprints, noted the ventilation shafts that connected to known rooms, counted the steps between wings by foot. Nothing. But now, after the fog, after the voice, after the photograph that should not have existed, the key had appeared. No message, no sound, just a click, a soft metallic ring falling from the inside of her bedroom door. She hadn't heard it land. She found it just after dawn, nestled in the crease of the rug, still warm. Its teeth were odd, cut with a jaggedness that felt intentional, not just aged, but designed to frustrate imitation. It fit the cellar lock perfectly. She opened the door. The air that met her face was dry, cold, unmoved. The stairs descended sharply, old stone, no banister, the light vanishing quickly behind her. She took a candle and pressed forward, one careful step at a time. At the bottom, silence. But not stillness, the kind of silence that changes its shape when you breathe. She stepped off the last stair, the flame in her hand steadied, and then leaned slightly, as if something unseen had shifted the room's balance. And there it was, the floor. A perfect grid of black and white tiles, alternating, gleaming faintly beneath centuries of dust. Not ceramic, but wood. Handmade, inlaid. A chessboard, full size, and on it, scattered across the far half, were 5 figures. Not statues, not sculptures. Bodies, each dressed, preserved. Seated or sprawled in postures of rest or collapse. Silent, unmoving. She didn't scream. She didn't step forward. She waited. Watched. The 5th body closest to her held something. A wooden knight, carved roughly, as though shaped by hand in haste or desperation. She approached. The man's hand was skeletal, fingers closed around the piece with effort that had outlasted breath. And carved into the knight's base, faint notches, irregular, uneven, binary. She photographed it, ran the sequence through Worthing's analyzer. And the result? A sentence. To find the answer, ask the question backwards. That alone was strange. But then she looked closer at the source text, at the binary itself. The conversion matched the ASC code for a quote. Not from a puzzle, from a novel. A phrase, word for word, from A Passage Through Mirrors, one of Agatha Christie's unpublished drafts. Eliza knew the story well. It had been reconstructed from scraps, notebooks, and dictated fragments after Christie's death, published posthumously in 1982. The Man Holding the Knight. He had been found in 1955. How, Eliza whispered aloud, does a dead man quote an unwritten book? The silence didn't answer, but it listened. She turned to the other bodies, each one positioned like a chess piece, bishop, rook, queen, each placed precisely in a way that suggested strategy or sacrifice. She mapped their positions. They matched a known endgame, a stalemate. No player could move. Nothing could win. Nothing could be lost. She stood in the middle of the board now, at D4, the very centre. The wood creaked beneath her boot, not from age. From pressure. She stepped again. Another shift. A trapdoor? No, a levered mechanism. She stepped off, pressed her weight to the knight square, F3. A soft click. The wall to her left opened, a narrow passage unseen until now. Inside, a study. Dust-thick, filled with racks of papers and scrolls, and on the wall, a chess diagram, painted, not drawn, and annotated, in Worthing's own hand. He had known, not just about the board, about the trapdoor, the bodies, and the quote. She opened a file near the lamp, Case 5. She hadn't seen it in the original archive. This was a private copy. Within it, photographs of the bodies, dated 1956, but dated after they were found, after they were buried, which meant, she checked again, the fifth photograph, the man with the knight, his body was identified as Samuel Rosser, a codebreaker who disappeared during a cipher summit in 1955, declared dead, buried. But the photograph showed him here, in Greystone. 1 year later, the date scrawled in ink beneath his image, August 8, 1956. The ink was smeared, as though someone had tried to erase it and failed. She closed the file, turned back to the chessboard room. Everything was still in place, but now the positions made more sense. They weren't players, they were messages. Each piece told a story. Each location referenced a different file, a different code. She mapped them. The queen was placed at H6, corresponding to case 3, the rook at A1, case 1, the knight F3, case V, the bishop C8, case 7, the pawn E2, blank, not tied to any known case. She turned to the notes again. There, in Worthing's coded annotations, a line stood out. The pawn holds the future, but never moves first. She returned to the pawn, nothing in its hands, no markings. But beneath its chair, a symbol carved into the tile. 3 circles, 1 broken. Her stomach tightened. Again. That symbol, the envelope, the painting, the bishop, the mirror, the photographs, always there, always marking something or someone. And then, beneath the tile, a faint seam. She pried it open with her pocket knife. Inside, a scrap of paper. On it, all moves are made already. You are here to see the end game. She turned slowly, feeling the room shift in temperature. Not colder, not warmer, just focused. The candle in her hand flickered sharply, and then went out. The darkness wasn't empty, it was watching. She stood still, waiting for the silence to lift, for the room to resume its shape, and from the hallway beyond the chessboard, she heard it. A footstep, measured, calm, then another, followed by a voice, not spoken, not shouted, but whispered through the grain of the walls themselves. He played black, she played white, but you are the board. Eliza stepped backward toward the stairs. Her boots touched the edge of the first step. She didn't run. She ascended, slowly, 1 step at a time. Behind her, the board reset. She heard it, each tile lifting, each body receding. The game, unfinished. Chapter 8. 6 case. A twist in the tale, the author's note that wasn't hers. She found it by accident. It wasn't locked away, buried beneath floorboards, or concealed in a false drawer behind velvet-lined boxes. It was waiting, quietly, beneath the third cushion of the drawing room settee. Folded, aged but not ancient, its edges slightly curled as if time had hesitated to fray them. The page felt wrong. It bore weight in the hand, not from thickness but from presence, the kind of paper meant for last wills or final confessions. And it was signed in blue-black ink, clean, unfaltering, cursive. Agatha Mary Clarissa Christie. Eliza sat perfectly still, the note trembling faintly between her fingers. The signature was precise, identical to the one engraved on letters archived in the British Library, to inscriptions in first edition paperbacks, to personal notes penned in diaries. Identical. But the ink was fresh. She blinked, then read it from the beginning. To whom it may concern, I regret the lies I left behind. Some clues were never meant to be solved, some never meant to be found, and some were never truly mine to begin with. In matters where fiction meets memory, there are omissions that served a purpose. I falsified evidence in at least 3 events reported as fiction which in truth were something far less entertaining. I did so under advisement, to protect more than myself, the one who watches he has not imagined. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. No date, no location, no postmark or recipient, only the words, and the unmistakable loop of her hand. Eliza set the note gently on the table, lit a candle, watched the flicker run along the edges of the ink. Fresh, untarnished, she retrieved Worthing's forensic kit from the cabinet, the same one she'd used to test Hartmore's suicide note, to scan the painting's wet layers, to confirm the wax used in the music box seal. She touched the tip of the applicator to the signature, waited, and then the result. Ink dated within the last 5 years, not archival, not preserved, written after Christie's passing, long after. She stared at the page again. There were 2 possibilities. One, that it was forged, a master imitation designed to fool even the closest analysis, or 2, that someone had written it as her, and not merely mimicking her style. No, this was deeper. This was someone who knew what only she could have written. Eliza examined the phrasing again. To protect more than myself. Events reported as fiction, which in truth were something far less entertaining. The confessions were veiled, but the implication was clear. Christie's stories had been altered, on purpose, fiction, overridden to conceal truth. Which meant someone had been reading alongside her, guiding her, watching her, rewriting her. She opened Case 6. It was the file she had avoided since the beginning, the author's shadow. The only entry in the archive not tied to a person, a murder or an object, but to a pattern. Worthing had traced references to a nameless figure across several unpublished drafts of Christie's works, not just as a character, but as a narrative force. Someone whose presence subtly redirected the plot, not just a villain, not even a person. An idea, a watcher. Worthing had scrawled a sentence at the top of the file. The one behind the mirror holds the pen. Eliza checked the drafts she'd recovered, the fragments, the ones omitted from public archives, and there in the margins of Nemesis a phrase underlined twice. Let them see only what they're meant to solve. She ran the handwriting through Worthing's archive. It didn't match Christie. It didn't match Worthing. It matched nothing. Unknown. She turned to the study window. The fog had lifted slightly. Dawn was threatening the horizon, but the candle beside her flickered again, this time in the absence of wind. She stood, moved to the mirror on the east wall, the same one that had reflected her too slowly 2 nights before. She approached it. 1 step, 2, and then the condensation appeared, not from her breath, from within the glass itself. And in it, as if drawn by an invisible finger, she was not alone. She stepped back. It faded. She returned to the note, examined the edge, there, pressed just beyond the corner, an indentation, barely visible, a letter, maybe a number. She rubbed graphite over it, a code. M, 13/47/B. She checked the catalogue system Worthing had used to cross-reference sealed letters. Section M13 marked correspondences removed. She had never found it. Until now. Behind the tapestry, near the grandfather clock, a panel she'd long assumed was decorative yielded to pressure. A shallow alcove. Inside, envelopes. Each signed in different hands, none addressed. She opened one. Inside, a single line. The characters don't speak unless he lets them. Another envelope. Even I could not remember writing it. And then beneath the pile, bound in ribbon, a small black notebook. She opened it. On the inside cover, a typed dedication. For AC, from him who completes what you cannot. No more deletions, only additions now. The end has already been written. She turned the pages. Not drafts, annotations. Changes to stories already published, substitute clues, inserted names, altered motives. And each dated after Christie's death, handwriting consistent, voice consistent, tone not hers. As if someone had taken her thoughts and gently, relentlessly, rewritten them. Whoever had done this hadn't merely fabricated a forgery, they had become her. Quietly, precisely, and thoroughly enough that the difference blurred. Eliza felt it then, that quiet shift. Not fear, not certainty, but displacement, as if she were no longer standing inside Greystone, but within the narrative itself, as though the stories were no longer about the murders, but about her. She turned the notebook's final page and found her own name. Just once. No sentence, no explanation, just her name, written at the bottom, as if signed in acknowledgement, not by her, by someone else. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 9, 7 Case, a new clue surfaces, the bell tower cipher. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the road to St. Morwin's still wept. Eliza could feel the slick grit beneath her soles, the way her boots pulled softly with each step, as if the ground was trying to hold her back, asking her not to see what lay ahead. The sky, still bruised from the storm, kept its light muted and its silence thick. Branches hung low and the birds refused to sing. Ahead, beyond a low stone wall tangled with ivy, the church revealed itself. Part chapel, part ruin, part forgotten story. It did not loom so much as wait, its single bell tower rising not like a monument, but like a finger to the sky, frozen in warning. She had read about this place in Worthing's private file. Not among the official archives, but in a penciled margin beside Case 6, where he had scribbled only 3 words beside a crude sketch of bells. The sound lies. The church was unlisted. It did not exist in current maps, nor in any registry of surviving parishes, yet here it stood, worn into the earth like something long buried and only half exhumed. Its stones leaned with age, weathered but stubborn. Its narrow door was partially ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry or never quite shut it at all. Eliza stepped through. Inside, the air was unmoved by her presence. The candle in her hand flickered not from draught, but from uncertainty, as if even flame hesitated to witness what had taken place here. The interior was humble. 4 rows of pews, a modest altar, an old wooden cross crooked above the pulpit. Cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners, but the centre aisle was clear, swept recently, by whose hands, she didn't know. She stepped forward. The scent was old dust and faint char, like something smouldered once long ago and refused to fade completely. The floorboards creaked, not with complaint but warning, each groan a reluctant memory awakening beneath her weight. To her left, the second pew showed the signs Worthing had described. Gouges in the wood, deliberate and erratic, spaced apart like breaths etched into grain. She leaned closer. 5 letters, burnt into the seat in a jagged hand, SAVETHEM. Each stroke deeper than the next, as if the hand that carved them had grown more frantic with each letter. Beneath the final M were small droplets, darker than soot, deeper than dust. She didn't touch them. Above the carving, on the altar wall, the crucifix slouched, not tilted from disrepair, but deliberately angled. Its base rested unevenly, The shadow it cast long and thin, stretching not down toward the altar, but across the aisle, pointing. She followed it with her gaze. It ended at the base of the bell tower. A trapdoor stood open beneath it. Eliza hesitated. Worthing's notes had only ever mentioned the bells, never the vault below. She stepped inside the stairwell, candle in hand. The walls narrowed quickly, damp clung to the stone, and with it a scent she hadn't encountered in Greystone or any file site before. A sharp blend of rust and wax, old metal and scorched wood, like forgotten fire. Her fingers brushed the wall for balance, finding carved names she couldn't read in the dark, and faint grooves where others had leaned, perhaps while carrying something, perhaps while leaving in silence. The steps ended at a door, iron-bound, sealed by a looped chain. The lock had been recently cut, clean. Eliza opened it. Inside was the vault, modest in size, lined with decaying hymnals and worn boxes that bled red dye at the corners. But what held her breath was the object at the centre. An unmarked crate, blackened along one side, its surface scratched by something sharp. It had been moved often, recently, but not far. She opened it slowly. Inside, reels. Audio reels, 20 at least, each one labelled in Worthing's narrow hand, though one stood apart, unlabelled, wrapped in cloth as if to silence what it contained. She took the first reel, the one marked C6/timecode 47, and climbed slowly back toward the altar. The old phonograph, still intact on a side table, waited like it had expected her. She inserted the reel and cranked the handle, a breath of static, a low chime. Then the bells began to ring. Not from above, not from memory, from the tape. They rang not with rhythm but precision, too fast, too sharp, too deliberate. Each toll shorter than the last, spaced with surgical clarity. It was not song, it was signal. Morse. She listened. Again, 3 long, 1 short, pause, 2 short, 1 long. The pattern repeated twice, then stopped. Then came a voice, ragged, human, but strained, as if forced through a throat long unused. The time does not pass. It waits. A bell. She comes when no one remembers. A hush. And then the whisper, barely audible, nestled deep in the reel's hiss like a breath pressed too close to a microphone. They do not hear me, but she might. Eliza stood motionless, the tape hissing its final notes before spinning into silence. She rewound it, slowed the bell sequence, and transcribed the code. June 18, 4:07, West Vault. A date, 3 days from now, a time, and a location here, in this church, the West Vault. She returned to the trap door, heart steady but less sure, and this time turned right at the first stair instead of descending. A smaller passage led to a narrow chamber, locked by a wooden crossbar that looked older than the bell itself. She unlatched it. Inside, stone shelves and empty niches, all but one. A pew, shorter than the rest, burned on one side. Its wood warped, as if once scorched and forced to cool too quickly. Resting atop it, a crucifix, with no crossbar, its vertical beam sharpened at the end. And carved into the wall above it, faint but visible in the candle's light, 3 circles, one broken. She stepped back, the symbol closing a loop she hadn't realized had formed. Every file, every cipher, every distorted image. This mark waited, patient and unspoken, as if each case was only a doorway to the same room. She turned slowly, the candle's flame dragging her shadow against the wall like ink across parchment. From behind, a sound. Not voice, not footstep. A chime. But no bell had moved. The sound came from beneath. She dropped to her knees beside the pew, running her fingers beneath its warped edge, where the flames had once carved into the wood. A catch released. A thin drawer slid open. Inside, a note. Folded, sealed with red wax. Not stamped, but pressed between pages long enough to leave its memory behind. She unfolded it, in Christie's hand. The confession is not real, The bells say what I cannot. And beneath it, in unfamiliar script, written with something darker, heavier, she knows. She stared at the words. The bell above her remained silent, but the message kept ringing. The date, the time, the vault. Something was planned. Something had already begun. And now, she was not just reading the end. She was inside it. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 10. 8 Case. The Mislead, the Diary of Red Herrings. There was always something too convenient about a confession. Eliza had read thousands in her time, false, coerced, rehearsed, rewritten, and she had developed a quiet instinct for the ones that tried too hard. The ones that said exactly what you wanted them to say, in exactly the way you expected to hear it. Worthing had warned of such documents in his early papers, describing them as narrative offerings, not evidence, but distractions. Designed not to inform, but to satisfy. He had filed Case 7 under this category, calling it too perfect to be real. The diary was discovered behind a panel in the linen quarters of Greystone's East Wing, wedged beneath a loose floorboard beneath the maid's bed. It had been wrapped in yellowed lace, tied with faded ribbon and covered in dust. The name on the inside cover, Eleanor Drew. The date of the final entry, October 11, 1953. That date alone was chilling. It aligned exactly with the night of the estate fire, the one that never quite made the papers, the one even Worthing had referenced only in passing, as if afraid to put it into full sentences. Eliza opened the diary with the reverence of someone unsealing a time capsule. The handwriting was neat but rushed, slanted toward urgency. The ink faded at the edges, and the pages, while intact, felt brittle in the hand. She skimmed the first few entries, mundane details of daily tasks, observations about the guests, whispers of affairs between the hall's more elusive residents. But around the halfway mark, the tone shifted. There it was, a confession, laid bare with the clarity of someone who either no longer cared about being found or never expected to be read at all. It was me. I'm tired of pretending it wasn't. I put the arsenic in the teapot. I sealed the study windows. I moved the clock hands forward so no one would question the timeline. I locked the garden door from the outside and left the second key in the priest's pocket. I wrote the note in her hand. I made the blood pattern on the wall. I did all of it. And I am not sorry. Eliza paused. The list was too specific, too comprehensive, and more than that, oddly theatrical. It described not only the how, but the why, and in doing so removed all ambiguity. It left no room for theory, no air for interpretation. It was designed to close the file forever, and that was exactly why it was wrong. She read it again. Not for content this time, but for structure. The sentences were clipped, consistent, devoid of the emotional fluctuations she had seen in real diaries from real confessions. Eleanor was a quiet presence in the rest of the file, low-ranking, mostly unnoticed. To believe she had executed the entire plot, orchestrated every step alone, and then confessed in writing without a single smudge, crossed-out word or hesitation, it didn't ring true. And still, the handwriting matched, perfectly. That, perhaps, was the first red flag, because too perfect was its own kind of imperfection. She examined the ink under candlelight, tilting the page gently, watching for inconsistencies. Then she saw it. At the edge of the final paragraph, the ink caught a strange gleam, like oil, faintly iridescent, not ink at all, pigment, a base she recognized, UV reactive. Her breath held. She reached into her bag for the narrow torch, adjusted the frequency, and shined it gently across the page. And then, there it was. Beneath every bold line of confession, a second message emerged. Handwriting thinner, sharper, overlaid directly beneath the original, but different, almost invisible to the naked eye. A ghost texts, the real story. She will believe this. She wants to. Let her. The guilt must land somewhere. Let it land here. You are not reading her words. You are reading mine. Eliza turned the pages, breath quickening, scanning each entry. Beneath every inked sentence, beneath every claim of guilt, there was another message, one that spoke not to the act, but to the act of watching. Do you feel better now that you've solved it? Do you like the story? You were always meant to read this. That's why it was left for you. The diary had not been written by Eleanor Drew. It had been written to her. The real author, whoever they were, had constructed a confession so elaborate, so meticulously forged, that the only thing more impressive than the performance was the intent behind it. The reader was the target. Eliza was the target. The last entry held the most chilling reversal. If she reaches this page, she's already too far in. The real crime was convincing her that there ever was one. She shut the book slowly. The room remained still, the candle flame steady, the shadows unshifting. But the silence now hummed. The entire case was a construction, a narrative trap, a perfect illusion of closure, crafted not to reveal the truth, but to prevent it. She thought back through the other cases. The night piece from the cellar, the coded bell chimes, the portraits with missing names, the reflection that moved just a second too slow. Each had left breadcrumbs, real enough to follow, rich enough to distract, but none had offered conclusion. They hadn't wanted to be solved. They wanted to be observed, to be believed. She opened the diary once more. Between the last 2 pages, something fluttered free. A torn scrap of red cloth, barely thumb-sized, pressed between sheets for so long it had begun to stain the paper. She turned it over. A mark inked in the corner. 3 circles. 1 broken. Eliza didn't blink. The symbol had found her again, no longer hidden in furniture or etched in walls, now placed in her hand. The diary hadn't been hidden, it had been planted, and the message was not for her alone. She stepped back from the table, scanning the room, now suddenly aware of how carefully it had been staged, how the pages had fallen so neatly when she opened them, how the UV reactive ink had responded to just the right torch, how the confession fit so snugly into the frame of what she thought she wanted to find. It wasn't just a red herring. It was a mirror, one designed to reflect her own assumptions. She had believed because she needed resolution, because the other cases were unraveling, because the truth was becoming too fractured to hold. So the story offered her a thread, a tight, linear, well-written lie, and she had followed it willingly. But now she saw it for what it was, a decoy. A misdirection, and in the corner of the final page, beneath the UV ink, almost invisible unless tilted at precisely the right angle, one last message revealed itself. Don't look at the words, look at the gaps. She turned to the margins, and there, across the top, spaced irregularly between lines, were dots. Punctuation marks placed with just enough inconsistency to suggest error, but spaced just precisely enough to mean something more. She mapped them. Dashes. Dots. Morse again. She decoded it quickly. It spelled a location. Mirror room. Say wing. Sundown. She glanced at the clock. She had just under an hour. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 11. 9 Case. Truth on the edge. The murder game that went too far. It began, as these things often do, with something meant to be harmless. A game. That's what they called it in the papers. A harmless tribute. A night of suspense. A literary homage. Phrases softened to sound like fun. A gathering of 12 guests at a private estate in South Devon, hosted by a reclusive collector whose only known indulgence was an unrivaled obsession with the works of Agatha Christie. The invitations had gone out 6 weeks before the event, each typewritten on parchment, signed not with a name but a line. No one is innocent, not even the reader. Eliza had known of the case. It had occupied a peculiar corner in Worthing's files. Thick with photographs, yet thin on official reports. Case 8. He had labelled it only with the title, The Ones Who Played. She had revisited it after decoding the hidden Morse from Eleanor Drew's forged confession, following the trail to the southeast wing of Greystone and the long-forgotten mirror room. But what she found in that cold, lightless chamber was not just the next breadcrumb. It was the script, a literal one. Dozens of pages, some typed, some handwritten, bound together in red twine, scenes laid out in careful sequence, not of fiction, but reenactments. Guests were assigned characters, rooms were dressed as scenes, clues were planted in advance. Every line, every motion choreographed to reflect the novels they adored. Each act borrowed from And Then There Were None. Only one problem. Someone never stopped acting. The game had begun with a toast. Champagne in long glasses, laughter echoing through an old ballroom where a gramophone played softly in the corner. The rules were simple. Solve the mystery before the final act. Everyone was given a sealed envelope at dinner. Inside, their role, their alibi, their secret. A body would be discovered in the drawing room. A will would be read. A murderer would be unmasked, but, as Worthing later discovered, the game's ending had already been rewritten. Not by the host, by one of the guests. 3 hours after the toast, the lights failed. Planned, timed, part of the script. 10 minutes later, someone screamed. Not planned. The maid, real, not hired for the performance, was found face down in the conservatory. No blood, no marks, but her fingers were curled around the game's instruction sheet, clutched so tightly the ink had transferred to her skin. The others thought it part of the show. Brilliant staging, they said, until the second scream came. And the host was found next. Then they understood. By dawn, the house was silent. 5 guests missing. 4 confirmed gone. 2 in shock. 1 locked in a wardrobe, weeping uncontrollably, repeating the same phrase through cracked lips. He never broke character. Not once. Not even at the end. No one ever determined which guest it was. The names had been falsified. The invitations sent from untraceable sources. And though several guests testified that they recognized one another, through glances, posture, the way someone stirred their drink, no two could agree on who anyone was. Worthing had pieced together what he could, drawing lines between pages of Christie's fiction and the statements left behind. He noted a precise mimicry between the sequence of events in And Then There Were None and what had unfolded that night. Every scene mirrored, every reveal timed. But with a deviation. The game's final act required someone to confess. On stage, in full view, the murderer revealing the trick. It was to be staged with theatrical flair, a red scarf for blood, a clever illusion. Instead, the room was left empty. The confession never came, because no one had broken character, and someone had made the fiction permanent. Eliza stepped through the cracked threshold of the old study where the remaining files had been stored, untouched since the estate changed hands. In the centre, a large oak table, the surface warped from moisture, curled at the edges like parchment left too long in the sun. On it, photographs, Polaroids, each guest, each room, each clue. But one photograph was different. It had no timestamp, no note on the back. It was of a hallway, narrow, fogged, and in the distance, barely visible, a figure. Just standing, watching. And in their hand, a copy of And Then There Were None, the title obscured by a gloved thumb, the cover warped as if dampened by something more than water. Eliza held the photo beneath candlelight. The grain of the image flickered slightly, almost imperceptibly. She tilted it, and in the reflection on the window pane behind the figure, a symbol, 3 circles, 1 broken. She turned to Worthing's file. There, among the last pages, was a note in his handwriting. This wasn't a murder, it was a rehearsal. He'd circled the date, drawn arrows toward later entries. Clipped to the page was a second photo, one not taken during the game. A street corner, empty, grey sky overhead, but written on the wall in white chalk, next script being written. Beneath it, initials. E.T. Eliza paused. It wasn't just a signature. It was hers. The chalk had faded with rain, but the camera had caught it. There was no way it had been her hand, not truly, but someone had planned for her involvement long before she ever knew what these cases were. She opened a folder labelled casting. 12 names, none matched public records, but next to one name, a note. This one never left. She circled it, tracked the references through the file. The guest had been last seen on the terrace, speaking to no one. He appeared in 3 photographs, each time facing away from the camera. In the final image, shot through the reflection of the ballroom mirror, his face was visible, faintly. And Eliza had seen him before, not in the archives, not in the case files. In the sketch found beneath the bell tower, the same coat, the same posture, the same man in the fog. The man no one could name. He had been in the game, and now he was here. She examined the final page of Worthing's notes. No summary, just a single phrase, written not in his typical neat script, but hastily, with pressure that had torn the paper slightly at the edges. The puzzle wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to test who would try. Eliza stepped back from the table. The game hadn't gone wrong. It had gone exactly as intended, because someone hadn't been reenacting a mystery. They had been testing methods, refining puzzles, measuring reaction, watching who followed the clues and who became one. She looked again at the last photograph, now certain. The figure had never broken character, because the game had never ended. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 12. 10 Case. The darkest realization. She was writing from the future. Greystone Hall did not creak that night. It held its breath. Eliza descended into the West Archive as if drawn not by will, but gravity. A slow, quiet collapse towards something inevitable. Beneath the estate's oldest foundations, past doors she had once thought decorative, she found the room Worthing had called the final chamber. Though no plans listed it, no blueprints marked it, and not one staff member in any oral history had remembered its existence. It was sealed behind 3 rusted bolts and a stone slab carved only with a date that hadn't yet arrived. November 2, 2025. Inside, a trunk. It was green leather, stitched with a brass edge and a cracked wax seal bearing the unmistakable signature, Agatha M.C., pressed gently into the surface like a fingerprint no one had dared wipe away. It had been hidden deliberately, but not to be protected, to be found. She opened it. Inside, pages, dozens, hundreds, not manuscripts, but fragments, unfinished outlines, story beats, coded sketches of plots not yet realized. Some were typed, others handwritten in what appeared to be Christie's own cursive, though sharper than her known style, more erratic in pacing. At first they appeared to be discarded ideas, scenes never finished, murder methods never used. But, as Eliza read deeper, a thread pulled taut beneath her skin. One file, labelled The Willow Glass Murder, described the case of a blind man found seated at a writing desk, a candle nearby, a note written in invisible ink resting by his hand. The description mirrored Julian Hartmore exactly. Another page, dated 1937, described a woman discovered behind a wall in a manor library, her body hidden by a rotating bookcase, exposed only when the firelight revealed a red manuscript wedged between volumes. That case hadn't happened. Yet. But Eliza remembered the scene, not from fiction, from the photograph in Case 3, the one taken from her own discovery. She froze, turned to the next page. A short story outline. A researcher becomes entangled in 10 unsolved murders, only to discover they are not investigating them, they are remembering them. Her fingers trembled. The handwriting matched her own. She examined the margins, notations in a different colour, red ink scrawled across the edges. A sentence repeated over and over, first small, then growing larger, more erratic. "You are writing this already, you just don't know it yet." She set the page down slowly. The candle flickered. It had flickered many times before. But now, for the first time, it moved in rhythm. 3 long, 2 short. Morse. She decoded it with her eyes. E.T., her initials. She turned back to the first page in the trunk. There, hidden beneath the top flap, a folder she had overlooked. Typed, watermarked with the same broken symbol that had followed her through every file, every clue, every false confession. The file was titled Case 10, Author 0, and beneath the title, her full name, Eliza Trent. She read. It wasn't a biography. It wasn't a criminal report. It was a script. Pages and pages of scenes, written in real time, descriptions of her movements, her thoughts, her hesitations. It knew when she lit the candle. It knew when she first heard the whisper. It described the expression she wore when she found the voice hidden in the music box. And it ended not with a conclusion, but with a question. If someone writes a story about a murder before it happens, does that make them the witness or the architect? Her mind twisted. Not because the idea was too large, because it was too familiar. She had written similar questions in her own journal over the years, phrases meant to organize her research, musings never spoken aloud. How were they here? How did they predate her? She rifled through the final section of the trunk, searching for dates. That's when she saw it. The page that made the world still. A list of 9 coded cases. Beside each, a brief title, a name, a resolution. But one had not been solved. The 10th, labelled only The Shadow Manuscript. And next to it, To be completed upon realization. The words blurred in her eyes. She wasn't reading someone else's story. She was fulfilling it. Someone, or something, had left this narrative behind, not for her to solve, but for her to continue. Every clue, every twist, every message, all mapped before she'd ever arrived. Or had she? She returned to the handwriting comparison, ran it again. Compared the loops, the spacing, the flourishes on letters like R and F. They didn't match Christie's known samples. They didn't match Worthing's. They matched hers. Eliza Trent. She checked again. 3 separate documents, all supposedly written over 60 years ago, all bearing her exact script. There was no denying it now. She had written stories. Before the events occurred. Or had she remembered them? And if so, whose memory was she working from? The trunk's final compartment held a mirror, framed, cracked, lined in brass. Behind it, etched into the backing in red script, every writer is haunted. Some simply write the ghosts before they arrive. She touched her reflection. The glass felt warm. Not like it had absorbed heat, like it was waiting to be held. She stepped back. The candle's flame rose higher, and then went out, not with wind, with purpose. From the darkness, a voice, calm, familiar. You wrote the final story. Now you must finish it. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for her. Chapter 13, 11 case, final reveal, and CTA, the 10th case. There are places you reach not by choice, but by design. Not because you're drawn to them, but because you were led. Quietly, persistently, like a page number finding its chapter or a chess piece returning to a square it never meant to leave. Eliza Trent now stood in such a place. And though her hands were steady, the silence around her had taken on a shape. No longer absence, but arrangement. It was always going to end here. The trunk was still open, the candle long melted. The mirror reflected nothing now, only the outline of the room as it was written, not as it appeared. The file labelled Case X, Author 0, lay across her lap, its final page unread. She didn't need to see it. She already knew what it said. She had always known. It was never about the vicar, or the girl with the rhymes, or the ballerina who spun without music, not the bells. Not the blood, not even the chessboard beneath the cellar. It was about her, all along. The evidence hadn't been gathered. It had been placed. Each clue, each coded message, each shadow just barely visible at the edge of a mirror, every phrase buried beneath ink that only revealed itself when she wanted to see it. It was all leading here, not to the answer, to the question. She rose from the table and moved through the West Archive, past the glass display of Christie's unfinished manuscripts, past the map that had never quite matched the actual layout of Greystone, and down the final hallway. The one the blueprints had claimed didn't exist. At the end, a door, unmarked, smooth, and waiting. She pressed her hand against it. It opened inward, slowly, as though the room itself had been holding its breath. Inside, silence, but not the empty kind, the kind that watches. The walls were lined in velvet, deep crimson, soundless. The floor was stone, marbled, clean, lit only by the dull flicker of a wall sconce that buzzed faintly, though no power fed the room. And at the centre, beneath a single hanging bulb, sat a table, a chair, and 3 objects: a camera, a microphone, and a typewriter. The camera was on. A red light blinked once, then held steady. The microphone, already live, cast a faint feedback loop into the room, a tone just shy of hearing, more felt than heard, and the typewriter. The page loaded into the carriage was fresh, crisp, typed in perfect alignment. Case 10, Eliza Trent. She approached. Beneath that, another line. The viewers now know too much. The type bar hadn't snapped forward recently. The ink was still drying. She wasn't the one who had typed this. Not yet. She sat. The keys waited. Not for touch, but for recognition. She turned to the wall. On it, photographs, still frames, from this investigation. Her face in 10 locations, each case site, captured. Not from a distance, not by surveillance, but from the exact perspective she remembered seeing the clues. As if someone had stood exactly where she had stood, or perhaps had guided her to stand exactly where they had once stood. Each image had a date, and each date predated her arrival. By years. One image showed her in the mirror room, but she hadn't been photographed that day, because she'd been alone, wasn't she? She scanned the wall. At the centre of the array, a symbol. 3 circles, 1 broken, and below it, a plaque. Observer confirmed. She turned back to the typewriter. 1 more line had been added, though she hadn't touched a key. The file completes when she knows she is the file. The door behind her clicked. Locked. She didn't panic. She just listened, and from above, a soft mechanical hum, a speaker, and a voice. Not her own, but unmistakably familiar. You followed the codes because you could. You read the story because it was meant for you. But you didn't write it. Not entirely. A pause. You finished it. Another pause. We only ever needed someone who could complete the pattern. She stepped back from the desk. The camera turned, tracked her. The light brightened slightly, not blinding, just enough to say, "You are being watched now." Not from afar, but from within. She looked at the final line on the page. It had changed again. The 11th file is whoever reads this now, and slowly, like a page turning itself, the carriage scrolled upward, revealing a second sheet already loaded underneath. Blank. Waiting. The implication was clear. She had reached the end of the script. And now, someone else was meant to begin writing. She stepped closer to the mic, and for the first time she spoke aloud. A single sentence, not for herself, but for those watching. The 10th case was never meant to be solved. The red light pulsed once more. And somewhere, in a room far beyond Greystone, a screen flickered. It displayed an image of her, standing before the typewriter. And then, an open prompt. A blinking cursor, waiting for someone else to answer. Because the mystery hadn't ended. It had shifted. Now, it was yours. There was one truth left unspoken, and it was waiting for you. Did you solve all 10 codes before the truth was revealed? Rewatch and look closely. The answer was always there. Comment below what you would do if you found the 11th file. And if you're ready for the next mystery, subscribe. We'll be watching.